I grew up being taught that do the hard work, head down, bum up, you'll get the promotion, Guess what? It's not the most conscientious or the smartest person in the room that's the most successful. It's actually the one with the best people skills.
Before we get started on today's episode, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the land of the Darug people. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to our elders past and present and the next generation coming through. Now, onto today's episode. Welcome to the Level Asian podcast. We're joined by Friska Wirya, a change management thought leader who transforms large organisations to enable them to respond better to the changing environment. Friska is the former head of change at the biggest gold miner in the Southern Hemisphere, leading digital transformation changes to achieve over $100 million in annual savings. Her expertise has been sought after at Microsoft, KBR, Salesforce, NCR, Women in Construction and Engineering, Women in Leadership Asia, Future of Mining Sydney, and Swiss Cognitive, just to name a few. In this episode, we chat to Friska about how she honed in on her interpersonal and communication skills during her professional career, her experience working on one of Australia's biggest mining companies as the only Asian female, and the importance of personal branding, especially for women. Enjoy the episode.
I actually want to start off with congratulating on TedX.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Do you want? So I know we spoke about this offline, but I think it's a bit of a black box around TedX and people going, well, how do you get approached for TedX? Do you apply for it? Like, what's the process with TedX? Anyway?
Yeah. Okay. So let's just distinguish between TED and TedX. So TED, you get approached to speak on TED.
Yeah. It's like the Super Bowl of
Correct.
TED. Yeah.
For TedX, it's an application process.
Yep.
And because it's a not-for-profit voluntary organisation, they were all run a little bit differently. So the key is to go on the TED website and find events that are close to you and then follow them on socials to find out what their application process is like.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's a bit finicky to see which ones are open, etc. And they all have different rules. Like, for example, I was going to be in Norway next year. And it was when TedX, and a TedX event was running in Norway. And I thought, great. And I just emailed the organizer, said, hey, I'm coming. Can I submit an expression of interest to speak at your event? And they said, sorry, we only accept locals.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, but that's because that's specific to that TedX?
Yeah, Norway, Trondheim was the city. But for example, the Melbourne one that I just finished speaking at, there were people that flew in from all over Australia.
Made their own rules.
Yeah. So it depends on the organizer, really.
Okay.
Was it complicated?
No, it wasn't complicated. The application process is roughly the same. It's an online form. There's 3 main questions. So what is your one core idea, right? That's all what TEDx is about. Why does the world need to hear about this right now? Why are you the best person to deliver this idea? And then I had to submit a 60-second pitch.
So what was the topic?
My topic, actually, my application process ended up not being the topic that I spoke about. So the theme for TEDx Melbourne was beyond the binary. And I wanted to talk about, not from a male, female perspective. No, not a pronouns perspective, but beyond the binary of ethnicity. So I wanted to talk about culture and socioeconomics, etc. And that's what I pitched. They got back to me 5 days later saying, thank you so much for your application. And I was quite late submitting my application. It was like maybe 2 days before they close. Like, we've actually accepted other speakers that are already talking about ethnic culture. We've been Google stalking you, and we notice you have a big profile on LinkedIn. You talk about digital transformation. Would you be open on changing your topic and speaking to us about your interpretation of beyond the binary from a technology perspective? Yeah. And I thought, yes.
Of course, yes.
Get me on that red dot. Yeah.
So
and so I changed my entire talk.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then how was the experience actually presenting for TEDx?
It happened so fast, so fast. And your mind plays tricks on you. Like, I'm a very type A person, as most Asians are, perfectionists. I spent hours rehearsing, editing, fine-tuning, getting feedback, etc. And towards the end of it, I was practicing maybe 10 times a day. And as soon as I stepped on the red dot, my mind went blank. And I went, oh shit, I don't even remember. And then the first sentence came back, and then it was like autopilot. Everything just flowed, So
it's like muscle memory.
It is. It is. Because muscle memory is strong when you put in the hard yards,
That's
you know?
Because I was going to say, we met when we were doing, obviously, the communications
That's
workshop,
right?
With Vin Jang. Like, shout out to Vin because he's amazing. And I remember, sort of when we first stumbled, I think it was like a morning tea break. I can't remember exactly what it was. And it was like, when Viv was doing the prep call with you, one of the things you mentioned was really around sort of Asian females being sort of quite obedient and shy and sort of fairly introverted, or that sort of typecast or stereotype.
Yeah.
And what struck me with yourself was you were so like open and like easy to talk to. Like, we didn't even bump in, sort of at the start of the day, and it was just like easy. We just started talking.
Yep.
So I guess the question I sort of have is really around where, like you said, type A, but also very out there. And we'll get into your background a little bit more as to where you sort of developed your skill set or your personality and how you are sort of a bit more forthcoming and open and easy to sort of get along with people. Where does that sort of all come from?
I think it's when I realized that if you don't take control of your reputation or your personal brand or what people think of you, you're leaving it up to chance. And to get what you want out of life, it doesn't happen by accident. It happens with intention and design. I grew up being taught that just do the hard work, head down, bum up, you'll get the promotion, da-da-da. Guess what? It's not the most conscientious or the smartest person in the room that's the most successful. It's actually the one with the best people skills. So I had to be adaptable and be willing to work on those skills. I used to think that those skills were very black and white. You're either born with it or you're not. But as soon as I realized that it's a skill that can be cultivated like any other.
Versus nurture type.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's an over-reliance on hard skills, and people think finance, accounting, law, etc. But even more important are those people skills. And so, I was always very bright academically, and I realized if I can apply myself to academic studies, I can apply myself to people skills. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of obviously like growing up, do you want to sort of rewind it all back, at the beginning, you can call it like where it all started, but like if we sort of start at the point like young Friska, where does your story start? Like tell us about your upbringing and, what life was like with family and stuff like that.
I was super, super shy. So I'm an only child, and my parents passed away when I was 2 weeks old, so I never knew them. And because I didn't have siblings, I was always ping-ponged from auntie to auntie, one uncle to another, one set of grandparents to another. So it was a very nomadic childhood, and I didn't have many people to talk to. So I just lost myself in books and dolls. So I was always erring on the quiet conservative side. Okay. Yeah.
And then you were born in Indonesia?
That's
is that
right. Yep.
Okay. And then when did you come to Australia?
I was 3.
3. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what were the circumstances of coming to Australia?
In Indonesia, Chinese are only about 3-4% of the population. And at the time, there was a lot of civil unrest, very racist. And my grandparents just wanted a better life for us. And they also didn't think it was safe for me in Indonesia. And so we moved to Perth initially because it was the closest capital city to Jakarta, and they just wanted to fly up and down whenever they wanted, and they did that a lot. So yeah, a 3-hour flight. And, back then, settling in the late 80s, we were one of the first Asian faces in the community. So it was very, very tough, very racist, as you can imagine. Was always teased mercilessly at school. I've had rotten fruit thrown at me. I've had broken bottles thrown at me. I've been spat on. And it comes from all sources. It's not just the derelicts hanging around the train station. It's the entitled kids at school. It's well-dressed businessmen that you wouldn't even expect would have those sort of ingrained biases, but they do. So that's where I grew up.
Okay. And was there a point where you felt like things got a little bit better when you were in Perth? Or did you choose to move away from Perth? At what point did things change for the better, I guess?
Yeah, it's when I chose to move away. So I actually did the latter years of high school here in Sydney. My perception back then is like there were a lot more Asian people here in Sydney, and they were a lot more tight-knit as well. So I felt more at home. And then things really kind of moved up and moved fast when I won a scholarship to study in California. Yeah, so I went to USC, did my time there, then stayed for some working experience. So yeah, it was a great time.
Well, during our prep call, I didn't know about this part, but like this is really interesting. So what did you do there, and what was the experience like overseas?
What I did there was, I applied for the scholarship, and it really was like the full university experience like you see in the movies. When you're at that sort of institution, you've got Beyonce performing in your lunch break and Jack Johnson just popping in. It's like, what the hell? It's like, it was just insane. And it was a great experience, threw myself into university life. But what I didn't expect is that I always thought American education, I always held it higher than Australian education. But I actually found the curriculum easier than what I had here.
Oh, really? And easier than Australia?
Easier than Australia. And to the point where I actually tutored in my spare time. I was working in my spare time. So, it was a bit of a relief, but also a little bit disappointed because I like being challenged and I want to get better. So,
what were you studying?
Human resources and strategic management.
Okay. And I suppose, going back to sort of like your grandparents coming here and then obviously moving to Sydney and then eventually this scholarship, during that time, I sort of wanted to sort of, I guess, round that back to how you sort of developed your personality. You mentioned obviously you realised you're like, you have to sort of interpersonal skills and your communication skills need to get better.
Yeah.
So would you say sort of along that spectrum or that timeline, at what stage were you like, okay, I've realised this, I've got to actually do something about it. And then what did you do in terms of, I guess, honing some of those skills as well?
When I didn't apply for a promotion, I just, how ridiculous, I just thought I would automatically get it because I'd been doing the job informally for a while and had a good rapport with my boss. And instead, he got someone else in and I was like, what the heck? I'm completely capable. I've always had great feedback. And I realized then there's no point doing good work if no one else knows about it. And that's kind of a key cornerstone of effective change management, which is what I do for a living. I help very large organizations pivot from A to B, whether it's a new corporate structure or they want to change their organizational culture or it's a completely new strategy. I have to get people on board and really emphasize the benefits of doing something differently. And so I think that's when I realized that this is actually a skill that I need to work on and especially communicating and presenting upwards as well, very important. I remember I had gotten my first GM role for a very large mining company and I'd presented my new strategy at a team meeting and I asked one of the people there, can I get your feedback? How did that go? And she goes, you know what? I expected more. I expected more from you. Like, I really like you. You have such great potential. But for the level you're at, wasn't good enough. It's like, oh, shit, that hurt. It hurt, but it was a reality slap. And since then, I've invested a lot of time and a lot of money into sharpening that skill set.
So it was really around, if I'm understanding correctly, probably around your professional career as opposed to maybe like during your education experience, right?
Yeah.
So you say sort of like reserve Friska up until sort of that point and then moving into sort of like the professional world. And then, I guess the other thing I'm very curious about, which I found really fascinating when we first met was, when you told me that you were working sort of in mining, the immediate thing that comes to mind for me is that it's very male dominated, or
100%.
I assume it is, right? And is that the case? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm often the only stiletto in a room full of flaps, like literally and metaphorically.
And so the thing for me was just, you were like, obviously even now, but even at the time meeting you, was like you exuded just confidence, like very well spoken. And then finding out that obviously, you work in the mining industry and very male dominated, I thought instantly that it was like, I wonder sort of what process that was. And you obviously touched on that presentation as an example, getting feedback there about how you were sort of improving. But can you tell a little bit about what it was like being the only pair of stilettos in the room and what that experience is like?
Not only the pair of stilettos, the only one under 40, the only Asian, so like everything was like stacked up. Yeah. And I find that the key to survive in those sort of industries is to get someone with heavier boots than you, if that makes sense. So a mentor, etc., that can open the doors for you, and their positive reputation in the business or their credibility will automatically wash over you a little bit.
Okay.
So I had, people in my corner that helped open doors for me.
Well, let's go through each one. Number one being female, right?
Yep.
So have you got any stories, anything that you can tell us about what it was like working as a female in such a male-dominated industry? Because, the thing that I think about right now is that as a listener, I'm sure there are people who either find themselves in a very similar situation to yourself, and I think not necessarily maybe from an advice standpoint, but just going like, how did you deal with, perhaps did you experience any sort of prevalence there where it was like, because you're a female, you sort of, there were issues around that, and how did you sort of deal with that stuff?
Honestly, the issues don't come from the men. The issues come from other females.
Okay, yep.
Right? Bullying cases in the workforce 86% of them are female against female, FYI. So I have nothing against male champions of change. They've always opened doors for me. They've always created opportunities for me. But I think it's the females that feel threatened that kind of throw the knives in your back.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't have any negative experiences. What I did do is often the men would be roaming around in groups talking about sport, right? I don't know anything about sport. So I just was curious. I was like, oh, tell me about it. Like, why are you so passionate about it? Why do you support this team, et cetera, et cetera? So I didn't pretend to know anything about football or rugby, et cetera. I leaned into my femininity instead of trying to be one of the boys, because I'll never be one of the boys. Yeah, and it was refreshing to them. It was a change, and they liked the opportunity to teach someone something, to flex their expertise and knowledge in a particular area.
And I think also perception's a big thing with this sort of stuff, right? Like some people play the victim mentality and they tend to think that, world's out to go against me. And I think you sort of take it on as a more of a, not necessarily a challenge, but also it's just like you accept the situation for what it is. It's circumstantial.
Yeah.
And therefore it's like, well, what is within my control and what can I do
100%.
versus what can't I do? You can't control what people do in that situation, how they react and what they say. And to your point, obviously the bullying, which is female on female as well. Yeah. As an Asian, and was that similar as well? What was that like as well, being sort of an Asian in that sort of industry?
I think it was less of an issue than the female thing. I mean, yeah, there weren't many Asians, but I didn't really experience any racial discrimination or was treated any differently because of that. Yeah.
I mean, and we're not here to also necessarily, I guess, fish out particular stories around that, because I think I really love it when people respond and go, you know what, like, no, not really. Didn't experience any racism. Everything was good. Because I think sometimes, people can swing the pendulum and sort of be at the extreme outliers. We had a podcast recently with the founders of Sprint Law, which are these, very well-known law firm. And they were the same. I said, did you experience any sort of like, negative or bad experiences, in law firms because of the way it is? And the answer was not really. I mean, there were certain things, but it was like most of it was pretty good as well. So I guess I wanted to communicate that, because I think also is that here is just all about like saying, look, did you have any stories or experiences? If not, then fantastic as well.
What I did notice though, because all of us here today, we're quite westernized. For the Asians in the workplace that were less westernized, they really pushed against that perception that Asians are really smart, really diligent, really conscientious, great at their jobs, but just don't have the communication and people skills. So I noticed that they were not given leadership responsibilities, more managerial positions because of that people skills deficiency.
And it wasn't even, like I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of that time is, I see that as also somewhat of a meritocracy as well, because if you don't have it, then you don't have it. I mean, you can train it, but I think when you sort of someone who's making that, if you're the key decision maker, trying to decide who to choose, it's not because they're Asian and they're not. It's partly just because, well, one has probably better skills than others in that situation as well.
So I just wanted to ask, at that point during your role and across all those years, had you already developed a self-confidence and being able to stand on your 2 feet very strongly, especially being a GM in such a male-dominated industry? Did you have to carve space out for yourself, and how did you do that? Or were you already walking into this role being very strong?
I was already strong, but I would say this turned me like rock hard, because nothing prepares you for the pushback and just how different you are from everybody else. So I remember the first time I ever went to Papua New Guinea, there were about 500 men. They were all dressed in orange high-vis and they all looked like huge American gridiron football players.
Oh my God. And
I walk in and it's like, hi. And everyone's like, boom. No, just blend in as you were. So I had to kind of be comfortable with the attention. And it wasn't like, oh my God, it was just, they just weren't used to seeing young females around the mine site, and somewhere so remote as well.
But oftentimes the other side of the coin is it serves as an advantage as well, right?
It does.
When you sort of are different to the majority in that situation.
Yeah.
So I think there are some, like, I guess, again, going back to two sides of the coin there.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would have found that to be the case.
Yes, agree. Like, so for example, I was part of the technology team. We were leading a digital transformation. So the other business analysts, solution architects, etc., they went on the regular staff bus from the site back to your camp, right? And you can imagine when guys have been sweating for 12 hours a day in 32 degrees, 99% humidity, you can imagine what that bus felt like. And there's no AC, by the way. And whereas me, I get chauffeured by the GM. I was like, yay, like the Queen. See you, boys.
Right on the top of the thing.
Yeah, so that's an example of like, hey, like that's the way the cookie crumbles. There's some disadvantages, there's some advantages. You just have to be cognizant of what they are and make the most of it. So I was actually giving a talk on personal styling and branding in partnership with Mirvac in the city at the Met Centre. And we were talking about how to influence people through what you wear and how you present yourself and et cetera. And I said to the audience, I said, look, this is, you can either bury your head in the sand or you can see this as an opportunity. And I talked about this experiment that was mentioned in a book by Dr. Robert Cialdini called Influence. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it. Okay, one of the principles of influence that he talks about is the principle of authority. And there was an experiment conducted. There was a guy, he looked very official in security uniform, and he would approach people standing outside a restaurant and he'd say, hey, do you see that guy over there? He's forgotten his money. He doesn't have any money to pay for the parking meter. Can you give him $2? The rate of people that complied with that request was 92%.
Wow, because
that's
of what
crazy.
he's wearing.
92%.
Yeah.
Repeated the same experiment. This time he's in regular clothes. Hey, can you give that guy $2? Doesn't have any money put in his parking machine. Guess how much the rate of compliance dropped? Wild guess.
Under
90%.
50. Well, under 50.
42%.
Jeez. Okay.
So same person, same words, different outfit, huge impact in your influence to be able to influence others. That's just from the power of clothing. Like if you know that, you can cultivate the perception that you want to cultivate. So it's actually a big opportunity because we're all on an even playing field.
Yeah. So that's one of the sort of main things that you, well, not main things, but one of the topics that you cover, you know, whether you're in engagements with corporates or whoever in terms of what you speak about and what you teach people, right? So what are some of the other themes and topics that you cover in terms of, I guess, the work that you do?
My flagship workshop is called Igniting Influence 2.0, and I'm actually rolling that out to teams at Culture Amp next week. I've had Salesforce, I've had Microsoft, and it's really about setting yourself up for success and articulating a really strong personal brand. So what is your unique value proposition that you bring to the table? And I teach people how to articulate that essence and transmit it to others.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like, is it, and I could be butchering this, but it's like unpacking, I guess, your, you know, USP, you know?
Yes, what
right?
makes you you?
Yeah, because sometimes I think people unconsciously know what makes them different and what makes them, you know, sort of noticeable. But when you ask them to either explain it or to have, you know, frameworks and things to sort of like, I guess, demonstrate to someone in a very concise and clear manner, people sometimes struggle with it. I struggle with it. I mean, I sort of think about, not necessarily as a personal brand, but when trying to, I remember initially from a marketing perspective, teaching clients about our methodology and how we do things.
Yeah.
And I'd spend like 20 minutes explaining. And then you just see people just eyes glaze over, right? And I feel like that's probably the case with a lot of people as well from a personal branding perspective.
Yeah, or like, for example, at a dinner party, if someone says, oh, what do you do? A lot of people stick to the stock standard boring answers like, oh, I'm a accountant at this, or I'm a this and that. They don't really... It's such a missed opportunity. Those 60 seconds you could use to your advantage and people will remember you. Because I have to do that when I'm talking about big changes in an organization. It has to be crisp, clear, compelling. And within 60 seconds, people need to get it and come on board with it. Or if not come on board, at least be open to hearing more.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so like working in mining to now... obviously engaged, you know, as a sort of a business owner on your own, doing your own thing with multiple clients. Can you sort of walk through that journey and when that happened and, you know, what that process was like?
So quite recently, less than 3 years ago, contract came to an end and I thought, what do I do now? Like, I didn't want to extend because it was high stress, high pressure, lots of travel, and I felt like I didn't have much of a personal life. So I'd sacrificed, attending birthdays, weddings, etc. And I wanted more control over where, when, how much I worked. I thought, oh my God, there must be a better way to make a buck around here. And so many times people would say, why don't you go out on your own, yada, yada, yada. And I thought, you know what? If I don't do it now, I don't want to look back in 10 years' time and wonder what if. Corporate's always going to be there. And so I said to myself, I'd give it a year, but a year has turned into, nearly 3 years, and it's just gone from strength to strength. But in the beginning, I had no freaking idea what the hell I was doing. Like, no idea. I just knew I was really good at my job, and I'd always had really positive feedback from clients, peers, etc. But it's a matter of, okay, how do I structure that? How do I productize that? So my approach is to, how Apple's got their entry-level iPod, then they've got your iMac, and before you know it, the whole thing's Apple. I'm adopting the same thing but with my business, because people can get a $5 ebook. They can attend a 1-hour masterclass, then a half-day workshop, then a full-day workshop, then full-on consulting, then one-on-one coaching. So there's kind of like a buffet of options. Yeah.
Let's just say around about 3 years ago, because I'm sort of filling in some gaps here myself, is this was around about the pandemic time, wasn't it, when it first started?
Yeah. So this was in November 2019.
Right,
I decided, you know what, I'm going to give this a red hot crack. And then 3 months later, COVID hit and all the borders shut. And it took with it my entire pipeline. And I was like, geez, thanks, world.
Thanks, China.
What a great time to start a business. And because I was a new business, didn't qualify for JobKeeper, JobSeeker, nothing like that. Because I didn't have the 12 months revenue from last year to compare that I was doing worse.
That's rough.
Yeah, it was rough. But I went all in on LinkedIn because I realized everybody was at home. Everybody's in front of their laptops. Now's the time to be known as that thought leader that separates myths from methods.
And then what did you do? Sorry to cut you off, but I really wanted, I sort of like to comb the details there. What were the exact things that you felt, if you were to list out, these were the 3 to 5 things that really helped me propel, so the business forward, whether it's LinkedIn or things outside LinkedIn, to get that going?
Content, consistency, and community. The first is I really got inside my ideal avatar's head and tried to understand what were the questions that they want to ask but aren't getting the best answers for. I also focused on educational and inspirational content because that's what the world needs right now. I really can't stand those LinkedIn posts that say, call me, special offer, blah, 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 blah. It's like unfollow, unconnect,
I thought you were
block.
going to say something like, oh, it's a real honor for me to be recognized. I was like, oh my God, the cliches. But yeah, sorry, go on.
The humble brag.
The
humble brag.
Flex, yeah.
Yeah. So I did that. I also focused on a diversity of content. So I didn't just run god-awful polls all the time. So it was a combination of sliders, tips and tricks, case study videos, which a few years ago, videos were getting really high reach. So that's what really skyrocketed my followership. I started on videos. But then I've followed the algorithm as it's changed, and I focus now on long-form text with photos. So that was the first one, content. And number 2 is I realized a once-a-month effort wasn't going to cut it. So before the pandemic, I was publishing articles once a month, and that's all I did. And one of my good friends put in a stern word to me and said, look, you change organizations for a living. Like, you need to take a bit of your own medicine and realize that the world has changed, that that's not how people are consuming content now. And he's what started me on the video journey. And I threw every excuse I had at him. Don't have the equipment, need someone to do my makeup, blah, 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 blah. But he's like, look, I've had professional videos done and I've had just videos me walking down Pitt Street talking about something. The latter gets more engagement because it's raw and real, and that's what people are crying out for now. And he said, look, just trust me. If you get absolutely nothing from this after 3 months, I'll shut up and I'll never bother you again. I did it for 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, I landed my first client.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you say who
video
it was?
content, University of Melbourne.
Oh, wow. And what was that engagement?
So I was brought on to help kind of establish their digital transformation foundations. But that ended up changing completely, and I ended up helping them execute their COVID-19 response. So a shift to a fully remote campus in 8 business days,
Far out.
turning their once a year annual open day event, right? That's how they get money in the door, prospective students, turned out into a 2-week virtual open days events with 54,000 registrations from all over the world.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's managing the changes associated with all of that.
Wow. So there's also, it sounds like your role has a big project management, or at least that was a big project management component, or were you mainly consulting the direction and they had the team to do it?
They had a team to do
Right.
it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, change management and project management go hand in hand, right? The PM manages scope, budget, timelines. I manage the people's journey through the change curve. So helping them move from resistance into acceptance and commitment, and then finally bedding that down into BAU.
Yeah.
So then how did you go from University of Melbourne into headlining for these big corporations like Microsoft, Salesforce, Ferrari?
So during the lockdowns, because we were all at home, I was pumping out content like crazy, and that really got a lot of eyeballs. Someone saw one of my posts about something on LinkedIn. He knew someone at Microsoft. Next thing you know, I'm headlining their first ever D&I event in Indonesia. So, and once, people like lemmings. That's why social proof is so important. That's why people ask for testimonials, ask for reviews, etc. Right? If we walk past a restaurant, no one's in there, we're not going to go in. But if all the Asians are there, we know it's good.
Yes.
That's true. Yeah, it's the exact same concept with this. So I was faithful with the small, and the big followed. After Microsoft, I then got Salesforce, and then all these other big brands kind of got on board. Yeah.
And what kind of clientele do you have now? Because I know you speak a lot about personal branding for women, and I want to hear a bit later on a little bit about your thoughts on personal branding for women. But I guess, can you give us a broad range of, if you have specific ranges of clientele, or do they just completely change from person to person?
So it depends what they're coming to me for. Like, for example, my consulting clients, they're only the big end of town. So very large, global, complex organizations with a specialty in heavy capital industries. So right now I'm working with some engineering, automotive and tech clients. When it comes to speaking events, it depends. I've spoken for the Bendigo Innovation Council, all those tech companies like I mentioned. So yeah, I think because the topic is so relevant across industries and sectors, I find that there's a lot of variety in the types of clients that I speak at. In terms of personal branding, that depends on who the client is that's wanting the workshop. Yeah, but I think people now realize, 20 years ago, the top 100 followed accounts on LinkedIn, 98% of them were companies. And today it's flipped.
Yeah.
So it's actually individuals that dominate the top 100. So now is the best time that you should be starting to establish your personal brand, like laying those foundations to be known for what you want to be known for.
This episode is produced and brought to you by Social Wave. Social Wave is a strategic content marketing agency helping businesses grow revenue using video, podcasts, and SEO. Head on over to socialwave.com.au to find out more. Now back to the show. So then, going off of that, of course, personal branding is so important, but can you elaborate a little bit on why it can be so impactful, especially for women in corporate industries?
I'll give you an example of if you were a job seeker, right? It leads to bigger paychecks at the end of the day. There's less pushback when you give them your rate that you want to work on, because they've already feel like they know you and they can see the value that you bring, and you never know who's watching. So I remember the CIO of a big company, actually, I was chatting to them the other day, and he said, "Oh, you never do your articles anymore. How come?" And I said, I don't think anyone reads them. They require so much effort on my part, hours of editing, research, putting it together, making sure the photo imagery is nice, etc. I said, "Yeah, I don't do it anymore." And he goes, "Do you remember when you first came on board?" I said, "Yes." "Do you remember when we already set a range of what this budget would be like, and then at the end of the day you asked for 20% more?" I'm like, "Yes, where is this going?" He goes, "Do you know why I gave it to you?" And I said, "Because I'm good." And he goes, "Yes, but I gave it to you because I read one of your articles on servant leadership and I thought that's the kind of woman I want to have on my team. That article was 4 years old. So you never know who's watching, and it's the kind of things that keep on coming back to you and giving back to you.
Yeah.
So
I want to get your take on this because I'm the same. My entire business is built off of helping people grow their personal brands, because a lot of people come to us to help generate leads and revenue for their businesses. But oftentimes the strategy winds up being you need to work on your personal brand, because your personal brand's a reflection of your company.
Yeah.
And, I've got a bone to pick with a lot of, say, marketers and people doing, personal branding. And that is that people seem to make decisions on what sort of content to do off of what I like to call vanity metrics. And so oftentimes there's a movement going on right now, I guess, in marketing where they call it zero-click content. And curious to get your take on this, which is the idea that just as exactly what you just said, is that you don't know who's actually consuming the content.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, and I don't know if this is the case with your clients and the people that you've worked with, is that oftentimes there was no leading indicator that they were coming as a client or a prospect if you were basing it off of what engagement you were getting on the content. So, for example, Salesforce or Microsoft and stuff like that. Were they engaging in your content?
No.
Exactly, right?
No.
And so that's my like penny drop moment when I realized like many of our clients who work with us, albeit most of them are SMEs, watch our stuff, consume our stuff, yet don't engage in it, and yet become our customers.
100%. Yeah. What do they say? They say the people that engage with your content, you need them because they're your fan club and they're the social proof that you need. But the people that buy off your content, you will never know they're coming.
Yes.
Perfect example, the director of Service New South Wales, the CIO reached out to me for wanting to chat about one of his digital projects. Never chatted to me before. Never called me before. He just slid into one of my DMs. I was like, what? But he was already sold. He goes, I've heard you're one of the best change management consultants around. It's like he could have only heard about that through the content that I create and that gets published through all the different platforms.
Yeah. And I think that's important because most people right now are making pretty much what I call short-term decisions with their marketing and their content. Because I think personal branding, a lot of it now in terms of growing personal branding is to do with creating content, like you said, right? And more importantly, consistency of content and also authentic content as well. We're in a marketing agency. We're sort of doing a lot more, I guess, cookie cutter stuff that tends to be a bit more, I guess, of the same thing. But I, to your point, I also agree that variety is actually super important because, people become desensitized to the type of content all the time, the variety of the content. And I think what you've been really great at, and even seeing you on LinkedIn, is just seeing, number one, the variety content, like I said, how authentic it is, and actually you're actually doing it yourself, where a lot of, I think, particularly around the top end of town with corporates, they really want to actually outsource this as quick as possible. It is not of priority to them. So do you have like an opinion on that? Because I think that's the one thing that I have a gripe with as well, because it's like, well, we could be you, but we are not you. And we're not in your day to day. There's so much stuff you can create content out of that would really help with your personal brand or your business and whatever your goals are. And yet they don't do it because they don't see it as a priority.
I used to outsource my LinkedIn content creation. My views are higher now than they were when I had an agency do it. And I think it's because no matter how good an agency is or a copywriter is, they're not you.
Correct.
And they can't really exemplify the true you. Yeah. And I'm happy to keep using agencies for other content, like if I want to create a white paper or a case study, etc. But when it comes to my LinkedIn, and that's where everybody finds me, I think it's important to remain true to you and to make sure that that is actually you.
And I think maybe the lesson, going back to Viv's question around personal branding for women, I think the lessons, or at least this is what I think the tips or the advice that you give is pretty much across the board, regardless of whether you're female or whatever, in terms of building your personal brand. Because in terms of, I guess, your objectives and what it is that you're trying to achieve, it's that sort of know, like, and trust factor that you're really trying to grow here. And like you just said, a lot of your clients, if not all of your clients, are off the back of that.
Yeah, but for women especially, I mean, I cut my teeth in tech, consulting, etc. And I saw that a lot of these women in senior roles were acting very masculine-like. And I think it's because they had to. But times have changed now and people are a lot more accepting of diversity and personality traits and etc. So you don't have to be one of the boys to be accepted in the boys club. You just have to be you. You just have to be a nice person. Like, don't be a bitch. Yeah.
Pretty much.
That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. I think, men are very accepting of women in leadership positions. Yeah.
So going off of that though, for a woman that is in that position where they are feeling more masculine, they have to fit into that masculine role. What advice can you give them to step into more of this feminine side and be who they are and accept that this is just how things are going to be, but take that into their advantage?
What you said just then, but they have to be masculine. I think the first point is to that awareness that actually you don't have to be masculine in that role. Number 2 is desire. You have to want to be feminine. And number 3 is that it will take time. Like, you've been programmed to act this way in a certain time. Like, you're not going to be all feminine overnight. Like, really define what that means to you. And it doesn't mean, wearing a tutu skirt to work every day. It could be something simple like more jewelry, or red lipstick. It doesn't have to be this massive shift from where you are today. So you can make minor, small, incremental changes to make that entire change a bit more comfortable and less intimidating.
What is your idea of femininity, and what can other women take away from that to apply for themselves?
My idea of femininity is being equally accepting and comfortable of vulnerability and strength. And our strength lies not in pushing things through with brute force, but it's actually the collaborative effect of getting people together from disparate viewpoints. And this is why women are traditionally in very soft skills industries like HR, marketing, communication, etc., because we're really good at putting things, complexity, and then simplifying it, and then it comes back out as something really elegant and simple. So that would be my tips.
I mean, Elisa Choi, who was a guest here, she talks about equilibrium, which is the idea that not everyone should aspire to be that one type of leader, and particularly the masculine side.
Yeah.
I think, obviously female, because of just natural, instincts, whatever you want to call it, brings something different to the table. And I think it's like having that more of a holistic way of seeing things, because everyone's got blind spots, especially in corporate when you're sort of a leader, as myself being male, I've got, my strengths and my weaknesses, and then it's like who complements the weaknesses, right? And oftentimes it's women because of, the skills. But I'll ask a question, which I'm sure, I don't know if it's a thought on Viv's mind, but we'll use Viv as a case study here, which is, Viv's young. She's, let's say early 20s, came out of university a couple of years and has joined, Social Wave here. And oftentimes finds herself in the limelight of 3 to 4 male directors. And we like to think of ourselves as very, sort of like accepting and that sort of stuff. But look, aside of that, I think just the sheer circumstantial situation of often someone who's younger, around sort of, I guess, guys who have been around for, a long period of time in the workspace. But then having the responsibility of her, who oftentimes is often an assumed lead role. So what I mean by that is generally, you give her a problem or you give her a project and she's the one who has to figure it out in between. And I think some of the struggles that you probably have, and we've spoken about this before, is around how do you sort of skirt the line between being able to make key decisions without sort of stepping on the toes of guys like us, who are technically your bosses and your directors, and what are some of the skill sets that she could think about in order to, do that better? Because I think, and this is very long winding, but I think for context, I think with Viv, she's very cognizant of not stepping on toes.
Yep.
And I think sometimes playing too neutral when I know she's got an opinion, she's got an idea about something. And sometimes I say to her, just say it, like it's that sort of thing. So anything you sort of could say about that?
I think if it's about getting comfortable with voicing your opinion and wanting people to be more comfortable, there should be a space in a meeting agenda that everybody has their say on something. If you're finding that the same issues or situation happens over and over again, then some sort of decision-making matrix would be really handy. Like if it's a less than this dollar value, then Viv just makes a decision without needing to consult all of the directors. So yeah, something like that would be
more definitions, basically.
More definition.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, more definition. It would make things go faster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other sort of anything else that comes to mind? I'll give you sort of some time to think as well. But let's say, for example, this morning we were talking about doing a Christmas special
episode. This feels like an intervention more. Therapy
session now. You can charge us for this after. But, you know, I sort of thought about that meeting we had this morning, and we were talking about what are the logistics and what's the plan. It's quite a complicated shoot. And I think, you know, Viv obviously was the one to sort of lead in charge in terms of developing the concept and how this sort of filming was going to pan out, and trying to get everyone to sort of understand where your vision is and trying to do that in a very cohesive, structured manner, I think meant that and look, we, you know, it's like Davey was on the meeting as well. He's, you know, we sort of blurt out and get things, we say our thoughts, and there's probably not as much structure, which probably goes back to your thing around sort of like having some definitions, having some space, having some structure around everything that we do in order for her to be able to get across what she needs to do. And so the challenge that I noticed very vividly was really just around how do you wrangle these personalities together? And I said to her, so when she first joined, I was like, I'm looking for someone who basically just tells me what to do. You know, that's what I'm looking for. And I think sometimes that gets lost because the personalities come out and, you know, you forget about this stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and also, I don't know how you would translate it in your particular situation, but in the change management industry, we have something called a change canvas, where it's literally a plan on a page. What are we trying to do? Why is it important? How are we going to support people through this, etc.? So you can change those questions to suit you, but then what you get is complete alignment, what everybody in the room is trying to achieve, and then how they're going to get there. And so if you've got that right agile mindset, being open and inquisitive, right, that it doesn't take much time at all to be on the same page. And once you're clear about the why and the how, you can just let it get on with the doing. Yeah.
I think there are just so many personalities. Like Davey, for example, he chimes in every now and then, but I'm just not used to what his like vibe is like amongst all three. Whereas like sometimes I'll just be dealing with Noel, for example, and Edwin, and they're like a little softer in their character versus Ken.
Did you hear that, Noel? Be a little softer.
So then when I'm switching gears to talk to Ken, it's a completely different personality versus Davey is like, he's either got a very, very goofy side versus a very like boss side as well. But then when everyone's in the same room, it's just like, holy shit, like how do we pick all these pieces together and who's on the same page, who isn't on the same page? And I think it's just like getting that, getting used to that as well.
Yeah.
Especially in that environment where, like today, like you said, I think when I was sitting on that call, it didn't help that I was on like
she was
video.
doing remote while we were in the room.
Yeah. And I was like, oh shit, like this is like 4 guys. How do I wrangle all of this? Like, let's take it back to the beginning and then go through everything before everyone starts blurting out questions again. So yeah.
In that situation, when I've got a lot of really powerful personalities in the room, I mean, you're a small business, it may not make sense, but where I can, I divide and conquer. I have pre-meetings before I get to the big meeting and just corridor conversations. Hey, this is what we're trying to achieve in this meeting. I would really appreciate it if you do A, B, and C. Or can you be cognizant, you know, you have this tendency to kind of just seize control and run with it. But really what we're trying to do is get a co-creative approach to do A, B, and C. So just to remind people before they get in the room, because when they get in the room, it's too late.
Yeah.
Their natural tendencies just come out and you've lost control of the meeting. And I never walk into a meeting without an agenda.
Yeah.
So it's like, what is the one thing we want to walk out of here? This needs to be accomplished. And if you get off track, bring them back to the objective. Bring them back to the objective. And if they keep on raising stuff and they won't get off their soapbox, I'm looking at you, Karen. Literally write it down. Literally write it down. Say, that's great. Don't want to lose that. Here it is. We're going to revisit that at another meeting. But here we're going to talk about this and get the meeting back on track.
God, I wish Davey was on this podcast. You know, this episode. But they're really good points because I think about the way that I talk to clients, and oftentimes I have clients who are fantastic, who can stay in the lane and they understand exactly what the outcome is. But then I do sometimes have clients who they like a good yarn and, you know, not only from a time perspective, but also the agenda, and things get lost. And at the end of it, you finish the meeting and go, I don't even know what we're doing next, right? So I take your point about having really strong outcomes. I think the lesson amongst this is really just, I think, putting that Asian thing into it is oftentimes Asians, and we're stereotyping here as well because you certainly are the antithesis to this, but quiet, shy, and we often as a tendency culturally sit down and listen first instead of speak first. Right? And I was talking to, and I can't remember who this was, but they were part of like a China-Australia dialogue, right? So they were part of the convoy, and the story they told me was basically that, you know, they went to China, they went to visit the Chinese, and the Australians came in and just basically started talking. It was just like, rah, rah, you know, it was just like, this is us, this is what we do. And the Chinese just sat there and listened for hours. And yet when things turned around and they sort of, things started to progress in terms of dialogue, one of the insights was they actually know more about us than we knew about them. And so I think as Asians, we tend to be like that. We tend to
Jedis.
observe. We observe
But
first.
I'm like analyzer. It's locked in here.
Pull it up next time.
So we observe first, but I think when you and this might be a topic around like how does an introvert function in a very loud world? We tend to watch first when oftentimes in an environment where it's like, you know, you just got this chaos energy going around and, you know, personalities and, you know, that sort of stuff, which is probably a lot about what you work with and what you deal with as well. And so as someone like Viv and many other people who probably find themselves in the same situation, it is like, well, how do I navigate this? And I think it's really just about having, like you said, structure, understanding like what are the outcomes and what are we going to cover off?
Yeah.
Because when the agenda is clear, then everyone's already on the same page.
Yeah, because that happened just recently with one of my clients, very large engineering company. So we have a weekly steer co every morning. And Jesus, yeah, like you said, they love to have a yarn. It's like, you know, 15 minutes late, 20 minutes late. It got to the point where I had to take control and I started doing agendas and sending it out before the event with time allocated to each one. And that really got us on track.
Yep.
But there's a fine line because I'm thinking, okay, once, okay, twice, okay, but after 3 times, I was like, no, I'm taking control. Yeah, because you know, and them not being business owners, they don't understand that for us, time is money.
Yes.
Like for them, it's like the meeting's supposed to be 60 minutes, goes to an hour and a half. I'm late for my other client calls and it just stuffs up my whole day.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just about, you have to be a bit more forceful if they have a tendency to do that and to keep them on track. And don't be bad about being the timekeeper. Like I'll verbally say it before the meeting just so people don't get offended. Just say, guys.
I do that too.
Yeah, just like, just FYI, you know, this is what we agreed on.
Yep.
So if you're going over, I'm going to cut you off, just FYI.
Yeah.
That's all you have to say.
Yeah.
Like,
I often start with like, hey, we've got a hard stop at this time. We need to get through this. This is what the agenda, these are the outcomes. And I think if, it's not a training, this is like a training podcast a bit, but like I sort of like, I think this is useful for people, right? Like listening. And I think oftentimes I actually need to be told what to do. Because oftentimes I'm rolling from one thing to another. I don't have time to sit, breathe, think about, all right, what's next? It's literally just go, go, go. And I think that's the same for obviously Davey and even Noel as well. Oftentimes we're all extremely busy. Time is money. You know, having people like yourself, Viv, and that sort of stuff, it's really just giving us a lot of structure just to say, look, here's what we're going to cover. Here's what we need to do. And I think and being forceful is actually a great thing, you know, instead of like, I guess, stepping on our toes.
Yeah. And I actually end meetings 5 minutes early. My 1 hour meetings are really 55 because I want to give people that brain space to collect themselves before the next thing. And also what I always do after a meeting, follow up in writing. Right, because there's a lot of talking going on and not much actioning. So it's just to remind people of their commitments. This is what we discussed. This is what we agreed. These are the dates. There's always a name assigned to an action. And that way you're always driving the meeting forward.
Yeah, so it's actually the wheels are still spinning as a result of that as well. Yeah, I think super important because I think these are skills that none of us get taught. We figure it out as we go. Some of us are more invested in others like yourself who probably go out and seek this information or probably learn through just osmosis, how this all works as well. And I think I, learned that across, 10 to 15 years of just corporate because, you learn the mistakes and you get burnt and you realize, okay, I got to do this next time as well. What's just to change gears and sort of, I think we're sort of nearing the end of the podcast is, what's on the horizon? Are you going to continue doing what you're doing? Or have you got projects coming up, anything exciting that you wanted to, I guess, share?
I think of my business as having 4 legs like a table. It's the consulting, the speaking, the facilitating, and the online format of it. So I'm actually developing a change management game with a games developer. So I'm super excited with that. Yeah, using augmented reality, etc., to simulate transforming an organization.
How does that work? Can you explain that a bit? Because I'm like change management augmented, like I can't even. So
like role playing, but using the VR glasses to simulate that you may be in the office, you may be at a mine site, you may be on an oil rig. So that's currently in progress and ticking over.
That's really
And
cool.
so, yeah, currently my consulting leg is very, very strong and very well developed. So my goal is to get more balance across my table.
Got it.
Yeah.
And I guess as a way to sort of wrap up, we like to just have like an open canvas in terms of what other parting advice that you have. I mean, like, whilst you think about that, the audience, like I said, is, you know, we're talking probably most people are, you know, early stage career, probably around about, you know, whether they're graduates or recent graduates or still, you know, wrapping up school, right through to, let's just say majority is around about the mid 30s, you know, late 30s, early 40s. So pretty broad spectrum. And obviously most of our listeners are Asian. So have you got any sort of words of wisdom, any advice that you give just based on your own experience with things and what we've spoken about that you sort of feel like you wanted to say that you haven't said yet?
You don't need to see the whole staircase to take the first step. So if you're not happy with your circumstances now, whether it's your relationship, your marriage, your career, or maybe you want to start a new business, just take the first step. Someone out there somewhere has been exactly where you are and has managed to get themselves out of it. So if they can do it, you can do it too. So find out who those people are and learn from them. My second tip would be networks are gold. So as you and I would know, I've only been in Sydney 2 years and I came here with nothing, like didn't know anybody. But start building those networks before you need it. And people often recoil in horror at the word network. Like, don't think of it as a network. Think of it as relationship building because, you know, life, business, it's all about relationships. So make sure that you seek out, nurture, and build the right ones because they are really what's going to get you through the tough times and the good times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think just going back to your story around realizing that, hey, just because I'm, you know, my hard skills are fantastic, it's, you know, this is a common theme across many of our guests is they realize at a certain point that it is important about what you know.
You plateau at a certain point.
You hit a ceiling.
And the more senior you get, the more important your people skills are, the less important your technical skills are.
That's right. So there's an inverse almost relationship there. And I think for those people who are sort of looking to take that next step, whether it's career, whether it's relationships, whatever the case is, I think I've learned that a lot, I guess, as a business owner across the last 2 or 3 years, that the business wouldn't be where it is now had it not been for the network. I mean, I could have just been plodding along, just being really good at marketing, but it's oftentimes the relationships, you know, the trust, what people say about you, your reputation, your personal brand, you know, which is essentially what people say about you behind your back, that really sort of propels forward a lot of that growth as well. So, yeah, I agree with both, you know, points as well in terms of what you said. If anyone, or I guess Aviv, do you have anything that you wanted to add, I guess, before we finish?
No, I was going to ask the same question. Like if anyone wants to look for you or find out more about what you're doing, where can we find you online or in upcoming events?
I think I know the answer, but anyway.
My website is freshbyfriska.com, so you can read all about me there. Oh, by the way, one other piece of advice I've got is that no matter whether you're a business owner or in an organization, start a personal website. That's by your name as a domain name. Talk about your interests, your hobbies, your passions, etc. Put your USP on there because the more often you do that and the more faster it is, people that are at your same tribe and attracted to your vibe, they'll be drawn to you. So it really is like a magnet
Go
effect.
VivianWay.com, make sure.
It's not actually. It's only Vivian next way.
I'll give you next way, that's right. But yes, where else can people find you?
On LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is the main one.
Yep.
Amazing.
Amazing. We'll put those in the show notes as well.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks for coming on the show.
No worries.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Level Asian podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode. And why not share it with friends and family who might enjoy it too? Also, make sure you head over to levelasianpodcast.com to join our email list and to receive the latest updates and get notified when the next episode drops. If you know a great guest we should feature, email us at contact@levelasianpodcast.com or DM us on our socials in the show notes. Catch you on the next episode.